On the sweltering afternoon of July 9th, 2007, as rush hour peaked on Jianshe Road in Jinan, China, the street was packed with honking cars and weary commuters heading home. At precisely 5:30 p.m., a sudden deafening boom ripped through the air, silencing the usual sounds of city life. The blast was so powerful that it shattered nearby windows and sent pedestrians scrambling for cover. At the center of the chaos, a light blue Honda lay torn open, twisted beyond recognition, with its frame scattered in fragments across the road. The driver, a young woman, was thrown from the vehicle with a force that no one could survive, her lifeless body lying amidst the wreckage in a scene too horrific for onlookers to bear. The explosion's shockwave injured two bystanders, leaving them stunned and bleeding as emergency crews rushed to the scene. A nearby taxi, caught in the blast's path, was left a mangled shell, adding to the devastation on the busy street. In moments, what was once a typical city evening had transformed into a scene of horror, leaving bystanders to grapple with the violent rupture of their familiar surroundings. In this episode, we talk about the story behind the car bombing murder case in Jinan, China. Yi Heiduan's story began in a small village in Shandong province. He grew up in poverty, the son of farmers who believed education was the path to a better life. Duan's determination took him to the prestigious Xi'an Tong University, where he became the pride of his village, the boy who made it against all odds. As a young man, he had only one goal in mind: to rise, to be someone people respected. Duan entered public service with a fierce ambition, working tirelessly to prove himself. Over the years, his dedication paid off, and he quickly rose through the ranks. By his mid-40s, he had secured a prominent position as Vice Secretary of the Shandong Provincial Committee. His commitment to his job was evident in his demeanor, always well-dressed, a calm, composed presence in meetings, and a leader whose words held weight. To his colleagues, Duan was the embodiment of a successful government official. Yet, as his career blossomed, his personal life began to fade into the background. His wife, a childhood sweetheart, was supportive but traditional, focused on their children and family obligations. The thrill of his early years in public service gave way to routines and predictable days. He was respected, yes, but restless. And it was during this period that he met Haiping Liu. It was in 1993, during a business trip to Liaocheng, that Duan first encountered Haiping. She was assigned to attend to him at a hotel, and Duan, almost twice her age, felt an unusual sense of excitement around her. Haiping was vivacious, a young woman from a rural background who, like him, sought to escape a life of hardship. Duan was captivated by her innocence, her smile, and the way she seemed to look up to him. "Thank you for your help, Mr. Duan," Haiping said softly as she refilled his teacup, her gaze lingering a second too long. Duan felt a surge of pride, a reminder that he was someone powerful, someone people admired. Over the following weeks, he found reasons to extend his stay and arrange for Haiping's transfer to Jinan, promising her a better life. Their relationship grew, first in secret and later as a regular fixture in Duan's routine. He provided her with a modest apartment and, over the years, helped her secure a job in the Jinan municipal government. What began as an affair soon deepened, as Duan felt the thrill of controlling Haiping's destiny, shaping her life as he pleased. Haiping became a source of comfort and companionship in his otherwise restrained life. In time, Duan's attachment turned into dependence. Haiping knew how to charm him, how to keep him coming back. Yet, as Duan climbed the ranks, his gifts to Haiping became more extravagant. A new car, jewelry, and later, an apartment in an upscale neighborhood. Her family also benefited from his generosity. Her parents were moved to the city and given jobs. Her siblings received similar opportunities. But what once felt like a source of pride soon turned into a burden. By 2006, Haiping's demands grew insatiable, and her youthful admiration soured into something darker. She wanted more than material things. She wanted marriage. She began to press Duan to leave his wife, threatening to expose their relationship if he refused. "Do you think I can keep living like this, Yihei?" Haiping's voice was sharp, her face flushed with anger. "I've given you everything, my youth, my future, and now you're telling me it's not enough?" Duan tried to calm her down. "Haiping, you know it's complicated. my family, my position. It's not that simple. But Haping was relentless, using every tactic she could to keep him tied to her. She would call him at all hours, demand that he visit every other day, and, on more than one occasion, threatened to harm herself if he did not comply. Duan's fear grew. She was becoming unpredictable, and he had seen the ruinous effects of scandal on colleagues who had been exposed. He knew that if Haping went public with their relationship, his career would be over. And it wasn't just his career. His reputation, built over decades, his family's pride, and his entire life's work would crumble. After Haping's threats became more intense, Duan saw his only options as either conceding to her demands or removing her from his life permanently. As someone deeply aware of the repercussions of a public scandal, he felt cornered. A breakup wasn't enough to end her influence over him. He needed a solution that would ensure she could never reveal their relationship. Initially hesitant, fearing disgrace and even execution if caught, Duan gradually rationalized his decision to take her life. Duan turned to the one person he felt he could trust absolutely, his nephew-in-law, Chen Ji. Chen owed his position in Jinan's public security bureau to Duan's influence, and as an officer, he knew how to handle evidence and maintain secrecy. Chen, indebted to his third uncle, agreed without hesitation, seeing this as a way to repay the man who had propelled his career. Duan and Chen initially planned to stage a car accident that would leave Haping in a vegetative state, removing her ability to harm him politically. However, the challenges of creating an untraceable accident in Jinan's crowded urban areas forced them to abandon this plan. Every time Chen followed her, he found it impossible to gain the high-speed conditions needed for a fatal accident without raising suspicion. Chen eventually suggested another method, using an explosion which would eliminate Haping and, ideally, leave no evidence behind. Once Duan approved the plan, Chen Ji set about obtaining explosives. Recent national restrictions made acquiring such materials challenging, but Chen exploited his contacts within the public security network. He reached out to Lian Dejin, a subordinate who owed his position to Chen's influence. Under the pretense of blasting rocks for construction, Leon discreetly sourced 2 kilograms of ammonium nitrate explosives and 5 electric detonators. To avoid suspicion, he asked 2 different quarry owners for the materials, which he then passed along to Chen. With the explosives in hand, Chen turned to his friend Chen Changbing, an auto repairman familiar with vehicle systems. Together, they engineered a remote-controlled explosive device using a modified car remote and the mobile detonators. After a series of successful tests, they finalized the bomb, securing the remaining detonators and explosives within the device. On July 9, 2007, Duan and Chen Ji's plan came to a head. In the late afternoon, Chen Ji and Chen Changbing drove to Haiping's workplace, the Jinan Municipal Bureau of Land and Resources. Knowing that the parking lot would be crowded with employees leaving work, they timed their arrival to avoid arousing suspicion. Chen Ji quickly placed the device under Haping's driver's seat using magnets to secure it. As she drove away, Chen Ji and Chen Changbing followed at a distance, tracking her route and waiting for the right moment to detonate the device. However, the stress and congestion of Jinan's streets caused them to lose sight of her car briefly, forcing them to regroup and wait along a route Haping was likely to take. Moments later, as Haping's car approached the intersection near Jianxi Road, Chen Ji received a confirmation call from Chen Changbing, who was stationed near the road. Taking a deep breath, Chen Ji pressed the button on the remote control disguised as a cell phone. The explosion was instantaneous, shattering the quiet of the afternoon and reducing Haiping's car to a twisted heap of metal. Flames erupted from the wreck, and nearby pedestrians screamed in terror. The blast was so powerful that it left little physical evidence, as they had planned. The explosion shook the city and drew the attention of national authorities, who quickly mobilized a team to investigate. Police and forensic experts identified traces of TNT, confirming the presence of a bomb. The Public Security Bureau initiated an exhaustive investigation, interviewing witnesses and gathering footage from surveillance cameras. One elderly woman, a street vendor who had witnessed the explosion, reported seeing a man acting suspiciously. She noted his unusual behavior of entering a police car immediately after the explosion, a detail that would later become crucial. Within 48 hours, authorities tracked the license plate and identified Chen Ji's involvement. Surveillance records confirmed his and Chen Changbing's presence at the scene, leading investigators to apprehend Chen Zhe just hours before he planned to flee to Hong Kong. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Chen Zhe quickly implicated Duan Yihei, exposing his role in orchestrating the murder. On July 13th, while presiding over a city meeting, Duan was taken into custody. Within 2 hours of his arrest, he admitted to his involvement, attempting to negotiate by revealing details of his corruption, including bribes from various officials. His confession marked the end of his career and the beginning of a sensational public trial. The trial of Yihei Duan was held in the city of Zibo, chosen for its distance from Jinan to avoid the disruptive crowds. People traveled from across Shandong province, determined to witness the downfall of a man once seen as an untouchable figure of authority. The courtroom was tense, crowded with reporters, government officials, and curious onlookers, each awaiting the moment Duan would face justice. As he was led into the courtroom, Duan appeared shrunken, a shadow of the imposing figure he once was. His hands were shackled, his once meticulously combed hair now streaked with gray and disheveled. He avoided the stares of the people in the gallery, his eyes fixed on the ground. The prosecution laid out the case in painstaking detail. Duan's affair, his misuse of power, the bribery, and ultimately, the murder plot. Prosecutors painted a chilling picture of Duan's corruption and moral decay, detailing each bribe he had taken to support his lavish lifestyle and cover up his secrets. Evidence after evidence stacked up, from bank records and property deeds to the testimonies of those who had benefited from his favoritism. For many, the most shocking revelation was the meticulous planning that went into the murder. The prosecution presented text messages and call records between Duan and Chen, their conversations detailing every sinister step. The judge's voice echoed in the silent room. "Do you deny these charges?" Duan cleared his throat, his voice barely a whisper. I don't deny the facts, but I did not want to kill her," he stammered, glancing briefly at his family seated in the back. His wife, stoic and expressionless, stared blankly ahead, refusing to meet his gaze. "She left me no choice." There was an audible gasp from the gallery. It was a weak defense, but Duan clung to it, unwilling to accept full responsibility for his actions. His desperation was palpable, and for the first time, the people who once revered him saw him for what he had become, a man who had sacrificed his morals for power, a man afraid of losing everything he had built. The defense attempted to argue that Duan's mental state had deteriorated under Haiping's pressure, painting her as manipulative and relentless in her demands. They claimed that she had blackmailed Duan, threatening to expose him if he didn't leave his family for her. But the court remained unmoved. Haiping was not on trial. Duan was. His willingness to murder her, regardless of the circumstances, outweighed any sympathy he might have hoped to garner. The prosecution's closing argument was damning. This man, trusted by the people, a symbol of authority, used his power not to serve, but to corrupt, to lie, and ultimately to kill. His actions had violated the trust of every citizen he claimed to represent, and his betrayal of justice cannot be forgiven. News of Duan's trial spread like wildfire, and the public response was visceral. Across China, discussions erupted in newspapers, on television, and in private conversations. The story captured the imagination of a nation weary of corruption, a nation that saw in Duan's downfall the hope that justice would prevail, no matter how powerful the accused. "Can you believe it?" murmured a shopkeeper to his customer, a high-ranking official acting like some gangster, and to think he was supposed to be an example. In public squares and parks, people debated fiercely. Some felt a grim satisfaction, seeing Duan's punishment as a just end to his misdeeds. Others lamented the hypocrisy of those in power, wondering how many others were hiding similar secrets. The case became a catalyst for calls for reform, with citizens demanding greater accountability for public officials. For many, Duan's story was more than a sensational crime. It was a symbol of a deeper societal issue, a warning of what could happen when power was left unchecked. The media labeled Duan as the tarnished official, broadcasting his crimes and the story of his explosive scandal to millions. Editorials called for a crackdown on corrupt officials, with some newspapers going so far as to demand stricter penalties and greater transparency. Duan's name became synonymous with betrayal and moral decay, a cautionary tale taught to aspiring officials, and a lesson to the public on the dangers of unchecked ambition. As the trial concluded and the death sentence was pronounced, Duan felt a numbness settle over him. The reality of his fate hit him in waves, each one crashing harder than the last. He had tried to distance himself from his actions, convincing himself that he was a victim of circumstance. But now, locked away in a cold, dim cell, stripped of his title and dignity, he could not escape the enormity of his crimes. His final days were a blur of regret and bitterness. He spent hours staring at the walls, reliving the choices that had led him here. He thought of his family, his wife, who had remained silent and expressionless through the trial, and his children, who would now bear the shame of his legacy. In his heart, he knew he had betrayed them, that his desire for power and control had destroyed everything he held dear. In a rare moment of honesty, Duan confided in a prison guard. "If I could go back, I would still silence her," he admitted, his voice hollow. "But I would have done it differently. Less public." The guard, a young man who had looked up to Duan, was repulsed. He had expected remorse, perhaps a sign that Duan had come to understand the horror of his actions. Instead, he saw a man unrepentant, a man who viewed his crimes as miscalculations rather than moral failures. As the execution date approached, Duan's final request was simple. He wished to die by lethal injection rather than by firing squad. But the courts rejected his plea. His crimes, deemed egregious and a betrayal of public trust, warranted no leniency. He would die by firing squad, a final symbol of the justice he had so callously disregarded. On September 5, 2007, Duan was led out to the execution ground. The morning air was crisp, a sharp contrast to the dread that hung heavy in his heart. He looked around, the memories of his life flashing before his eyes, his childhood in the village, the pride of his parents as he entered university, the early days of his career, full of hope and ambition. Each memory was tinged with regret, tainted by the realization of how far he had fallen. As he faced the firing squad, he closed his eyes, bracing himself for the final moment. The command was given, and 2 shots echoed in the quiet morning, ending the life of a man once revered, now reviled. News of Duan's execution spread quickly, and reactions were mixed. For some, his death was a victory, a reassurance that no one, not even a high-ranking official, was above the law. For others, it was a sobering reminder of the corrosive effects of power and ambition, a cautionary tale that warned against the perils of greed and moral compromise. In the weeks that followed, Duan's story was retold countless times. Schools used it as a case study on integrity and ethics, and officials across the country were reminded of the consequences of corruption. His name became synonymous with betrayal, and his downfall was held up as a warning to those who might be tempted to follow a similar path. Duan's legacy, once built on respect and authority, now served as a dark lesson for future generations. His life, a testament to ambition, ended as a cautionary tale of disgrace. He had climbed to the top, only to be remembered as a man consumed by his own desires, willing to destroy lives to protect his secrets. For the people of Jinan and across China, Yihe Duan's case was a grim reminder. In the pursuit of power, one's integrity must never be compromised. His story lived on, not as an example of success, but as a lesson in the dangers of unchecked ambition and the ultimate price of betrayal. Years after Duan's execution, his story still haunted those who knew him. His former colleagues spoke of him with hushed voices, avoiding mention of his name. His family, bearing the weight of his crimes, faded into obscurity, unwilling to carry the legacy of a man who had betrayed their trust. For the young generation, Duan's story was a reminder that power without morality was a dangerous path. His name was taught in ethics courses, a case study in the consequences of corruption. In the minds of many, Duan was no longer the esteemed official he had once been, but a symbol of moral failure, a man who had everything, but whose greed and ambition led to his ruin. And so, the story of Yihe Duan became part of the collective memory, a warning etched in the minds of those who came after him. His life, his choices, and his ultimate fate served as a reminder to live with integrity, to honor the trust of those one serves, and to remember that no ambition, however great, is worth the price of one's soul.